was a huge environmental calamity. Just over 2 years ago, an arsonist set fire to a warehouse in St-Basile-le-Grand, Quebec. It was filled with toxic PCBs. The cloud of black smoke threatened the lives of thousands of people and triggered a mass evacuation. So far, the disaster has cost Quebec taxpayers $36 million. But the man who owned the warehouse hasn't had to pay a cent for the havoc, anxiety, and fear the fire created. Mark Levy decided it wasn't worth sticking around for the fallout, and he made a clean getaway to Florida. He hasn't been seen or heard from since the fire, until we caught up with him in Miami.
Mark Levy is not a gangster, even if it's been called by that name. On the contrary, he's a guy that really cared a lot about the environment, and he never polluted anything. We never polluted anything.
That's not how most Quebecers remember Mark Levy. Residents of St-Basile-le-Grand will never forget that August night of 1988. It was an environmental nightmare. Mark Levy's warehouse, jammed with PCBs, burns out of control. There are fears that the black cloud hovering over the town will cause cancer, birth defects. 3,500 people are evacuated from their homes. They're scared. Residents line up to be tested for PCB contamination. It's 3 weeks before they're told they can go back home.
What is a safe level on here?
The experts say everyone is safe, but not everyone believes them.
The roofs, the whole house is contaminated.
Mark Levy had nothing to do with starting the fire. It was arson. But Quebecers were shocked that Levy crammed so many barrels of such a dangerous waste in a warehouse that looked more like a shack. Levy was a mystery man. The only picture the media had was an old college photograph. Just hours after the fire, he hops on a plane, Air Canada Flight 930 to Miami, leaving the residents of St-Basile to clean up the mess. Mary Claire Hamilton and her children still live near Levy's warehouse, and 2 years later, she's still upset at Mark Levy.
The biggest fear for the children was the after effects, that they would have leukemia or something like that, brain damage or whatever, and that I wish he could perhaps experience just for a few days what we went through and have it brought home to him, what kind of a gamble he was taking with the lives of innocent people just to make a buck.
Mark Levy made enough bucks to lead the good life. He had a home in Montreal and a home in Florida. For a few years before the fire, he had a place in Pompano Beach just north of Miami. Levy bought this waterfront home for $250,000, a swimming pool, and a place to dock his boat. But Levy sold this house in 1987. So where was Mark Levy now?
1895 72nd Street West, Hialeah.
We went to this electronic tracing company in Florida. After all, if Levy was living down south for 2 years, he had to leave a trail. We ran his name through the computers.
We found a Marco Levy, or Levy, in Florida with a valid driver's license. And we also found 2 vehicles that he had owned, a Ferrari and a Cadillac. Unfortunately, no change of address was found.
But Levy did leave a legal trail, hiring lawyers in Canada and the U.S. Here in Coral Gables, a comfortable suburb of Miami, we eventually reached his Florida lawyers. And under the watchful eye of his attorney, Mark Levy finally agreed to tell his side of the story. What do you want to say to the people of St-Basile-le-Grand?
I want to tell them I'm very sorry for this accident. I want to tell them I've been a victim, probably worse than I've been a victim.
But why board a plane for Florida as your warehouse is burning down? I mean, it gives the impression that this is a man running, a man who's guilty of something.
I was not running meanwhile the warehouse was burning down. I took a flight to Florida the morning after the fire. I realized that it was a terrible situation, that I would have lived in the next hours. And that's why I called the attorney and asked him what am I supposed to do? And he said, get off.
Why would a lawyer give you advice to leave Quebec and fly to the United States?
That's a good question. I don't have that answer.
Mark Levy may not know why his lawyers gave him that advice, but he does know environmental law inside out. Before the fire, there was never a single charge against any of his companies. He insists he's the scapegoat for the St-Basile disaster. He's not an environmental bad guy. He's an environmental angel.
The real Mark Levy is certainly, with no doubt, with a proven record, an environmentalist.
I get the impression sometimes it's like Mark Levy was on a white horse riding into Quebec and saying, I'm going to save you from this big PCB problem.
You have the right impression.
This is what Mark Levy was going to save us from. Polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, used mainly as coolants in electrical transformers. The federal government banned PCBs in 1977 because of fears they cause cancer. Companies were suddenly stuck with tons of PCB waste. Mark Levy was one of the first to realize that all that PCB waste could be recycled into big bucks. Levy worked for the Federal Environment Department in 1979 as an engineer. Part of his job was to find out just how much PCB waste there was in Quebec. He got the idea to set up his own company to handle PCBs. The Federal Environment Department forced him to resign for conflict of interest. But the Quebec government eventually gave him a permit to operate PCB warehouses. So if you wanted to get rid of your PCBs in Quebec, you had to do business with Mark Levy. Levy's biggest warehouse was right in the middle of this cornfield in St-Basile-le-Grand, and he did a booming business. Companies such as Hydro-Quebec and Alcan were only too glad to pay Levy tens of thousands of dollars to get rid of their problem. By 1985, Levy's warehouse was bursting at the seams. These pictures are from a TV report at the time, one of many media exposés warning that the warehouse was run down and unsafe. But that's not how the owner remembers it.
There were no drums ever outside the building.
Do those kind of pictures lie?
I think that you have to put everything in the right perspective. You can have pictures taken to make it appear upside down completely. But it was just looking bad. It was not polluting environment.
It looked bad, but it didn't pollute.
Yes, that's exactly the words.
This was the last person, the last firm we wanted to entrust with sensitive questions like the warehousing of PCBs.
Clifford Lincoln was Quebec's environment minister at the time of the St-Basile fire. When he took office 4 years before, he was horrified at the state of Levy's warehouse.
The barrels were in a state of organized chaos in there. There were no corridors for people to even walk through. They were piled higgledy-piggledy all over the place. It was the biggest mess. Windows were broken, doors were broken. There was no fire alarm, no burglar alarm. He was very happy to leave it like it is because he had no financial incentive. He had no profit to make. He had made his money. So this thing was a nuisance to him.
Didn't we create the Mark Levys by banning a substance like PCBs and not putting in place a way of safely getting rid of them?
Well, of course. Well, of course. Tomorrow, if you say you ban PCBs, what do you do with it? What do you do with the stuff? You're going to put it someplace. So it's almost a license for people to set up businesses where they make a lot of money because we've created one policy without any thought as to what we do with the stuff that is banned.
Lincoln refused to renew Levy's permit, but he says he couldn't shut down the warehouse. There was nowhere else to put all those PCBs. So the government forced Levy to meet their minimum safety standards, at least on paper. Because what's curious is that environment inspectors always told Levy ahead of time they were coming to check up. Louise Lapierre worked as Levy's secretary and office manager for 4 years. She remembers a couple of times when her boss had enough time to clean up his act before the inspectors came.
Il remplissait la vanne de liquide. Et même, il changeait,
He would fill a van outside the warehouse with barrels of liquid PCBs when he was over his limit. He'd mix solid and liquid PCBs and change labels on barrels to fool the inspectors a bit.
mêler un peu les inspecteurs.
It's not true. It's completely untrue. I think that those allegations are false, and the PCBs that were inside there, that we couldn't even move them. I mean, we didn't have anything to move them sometimes.
Que c'est lui le menteur.
He's a liar.
C'est lui qui
He's in the wrong from A to Z.
De A à Z.
Wasn't it stupid for the inspectors to tell Levy when they were going to come and visit?
Your comment is well taken. All I can say is obviously the inspections were not as well done, and if Levy was warned in advance, then certainly that makes inspections a bit of a farce.
A farce that went on for several years. These official records from the Quebec Environment Ministry show 5 different inspectors visited Levy's warehouse 47 times in the years before the fire. In this report, the inspector says he peeked through the window and gave Levy's warehouse a clean bill of health. This was the last inspection ever done. 3 weeks later, fire destroyed the warehouse. The Quebec Fire Commissioner spent months investigating the disaster, hearing over 70 witnesses. He concluded Levy went after maximum profit with minimum respect for safety. For example, Levy had almost twice as many barrels of liquid PCBs than his permit allowed, storing 162,000 liters of the stuff. That brings bald-faced denials from Levy. Now, were you over the limit, that much over the limit?
Victor, we were not over the limit.
Witnesses testified Levy falsified his inventory reports to the Environment Department.
This is completely untrue. This is completely untrue.
Fire investigators also say Levy stored flammable solvents at his site.
I know for sure that's completely untrue. There were no solvents in St-Basile.
You never kept any highly inflammable solvents on your site?
Maximum we kept was a can of about 5 gallons of solvent, but was not there at the time of the fire.
Either all of these witnesses are lying, or you're lying.
I think, Victor, you are making a very good statement here. I cannot lie. I am very candid, and I know I am not able to lie.
If you're so convinced of your innocence, that you were wronged, that you were slandered and libeled, why don't you just go back to Quebec and say, hey, I want to set this record straight?
I didn't go back on advice of attorneys.
Levy got some good news last spring. After an 18-month police investigation, the Crown decided not to lay any criminal charges against him. Police and prosecutors wouldn't speak on camera, but they say their case was hopelessly compromised because the Quebec Environment Department knew all along what Levy was doing. But there are still arrest warrants out in Quebec for Mark Levy, not for criminal offenses, but for over 40 charges under the environmental law. The government says here, at another one of Levy's businesses, he illegally stored and transported dangerous waste. But Levy can't be extradited from the United States on these charges. So Mark Levy is safe in Florida, as long as keeping up with the news from home is as close as he gets to Canada.
Oh, Bob. Good morning, Mark.
Levy says he wants to come back to Canada. He and his Miami lawyer, Paul Berger, want to strike some kind of deal with Quebec. Berger insists his client has not been hiding, that the Quebec government has known all along how to reach Mark Levy. The proof? Quebec was in touch with Levy soon after the fire. The government sent this letter in December 1988 to his lawyers in Coral Gables. A year later, when Quebec sent Levy a bill totaling $8.7 million for the cleanup, they knew exactly where to mail it. Levy says he won't pay for the St-Basile cleanup because he didn't start the fire. Besides, he says he's broke. But for years, Levy was transferring money from his Quebec operations to a company he set up in the States called North Central Dynamics. How much money did you make from PCBs?
I didn't make any money. My account, my bank account was, I think, $1,500. So don't think about Mark Levy as having come out of it with money.
Well, I've got photocopies of checks here, all done within a 14-day period in June of 1984. One for $60,000, North Central Dynamics from you. One for $80,000. One for $90,000.
North Central decided that part of the money was better invested in the United States.
You invested money in the United States?
Yes, I did invest money in real estate in the United States, and we came up winning.
Police say that Levy made as much as $2.5 million from PCBs and shipped most of that money to the States in the years before the fire. We found out that Levy still has an account in this bank in Pompano Beach. Exactly 6 days after the fire, and this is according to court documents, Levy had in one personal account alone $261,825.21 US. Mark Levy says all that money has gone to pay his legal fees. He sold his Cadillac and his Ferrari, he says, and he went out of his way to show us that he's now reduced to taking public transit. Levy says these days he's stuck in a small $360 a month apartment with his wife and child, but he wouldn't show us his home. He says he wants to protect his family's privacy. Even his lawyer doesn't know where he lives. As much as $2.5 million was transferred. You're now claiming poverty. Where is this money? Where did it go?
Let's assume, just for the discussion, that we had a total income of about $2 million in the companies. Let's assume, for the purpose of the discussion, that we had in around 1.8 million current expenses. We are left with $200,000. Now, this net income doesn't belong to me. It belongs to a company called North Central Dynamics.
100% owned by you.
But it doesn't belong to me. This is clear, it's legal. The money belonged to a company.
Given all the evidence, can you expect Quebecers ever to believe that you ever cared about the environment except as a way to make money?
I have cared. I have a proven track. My companies have a proven track of being cleaners of the environment, not polluters.
Back in St-Basile-le-Grand, most of Levy's PCBs are still here. 140 containers full.
Right now, I'm still having all the PCBs that are stocked here.
Bernard Gagnon is the mayor of St-Basile. He says the site is still dangerous, right next to an explosives plant, a gas pipeline, and speeding trains.
We are redoing the same thing as we were doing in 1981, 1985. We are not taking lessons from what took place here. Look at the site. Just look at the site. It's a cornfield.
And residents like Mary Claire Hamilton can't forgive Mark Levy.
Just that I wonder, he has children, I believe, older ones, but I wonder how he would feel if somebody put their lives on the line to get rich. It's...
What do you say to a mother in St-Basile-le-Grand who has her children, and she says, how could Mark Levy put my children at such risk?
As a father, as a person, as the owner of the companies, I really feel sad about what happened. But you have to remember that there is no fault on my part in this.
The Quebec government blames you. The Quebec Fire Commissioner blames you. The people of St-Basile-le-Grand blame you. Do you accept none of the blame?
Not at all. I do not accept any blame in this situation. On the contrary, hopefully, in the next future, they will give me a medal.
Pierre Paradis took on the environment portfolio in Quebec a year ago. He inherited the St-Basile mess, but he hasn't had much to say about it. Last Friday, he agreed to talk to me in his Montreal office. We showed him our story, and you'll see he's got some candid views and some surprising news for the residents of St-Basile-le-Grand.
I do not accept any blame in this situation. On the contrary, hopefully, in the next future, they will give me a medal.
So are you going to give him a medal?
Not at all. The Department of Environment has asked the Attorney General for Quebec to take all legal measures against Mark Levy and his corporations. And if he feels that he is innocent, he's welcome back in Quebec, where he will be treated very fairly by the judicial system.
In reality, Mark Levy is safe in Florida. You can't touch him. You can't get this guy.
Well, it's frustrating for everybody involved, the families, the parents. It's frustrating for a department that has no money, like the Department of Environment, to have to foot bills of that dimension through public monies.
What are you going to do with Mark Levy?
Well, we are suing him right now for $8 million. We have taken security measures against some of the assets that he has left in the province of Quebec, and we're waiting for him to show up in Quebec.
Well, Mark Levy says he wants to deal. Are you ready to deal?
No. I think the law is the law, and the law should be applied, and that the judge should decide.
You say the law has to be applied. The man is safe in Florida. You cannot extradite him.
No, we cannot extradite under Canadian law unless somebody is charged with a criminal charge.
So why don't you start negotiations with his lawyers and say to his lawyers, look, let's see if we can get some money out of this or get him to pay some kind of fine, at least get something.
When we decide to sue somebody in the Department of Environment, the lawyers have new instructions, is that you don't make out-of-court deals with polluters, you let the judge apply the law.
So Mark Levy, in essence, will have to remain a fugitive outside of Canada, and until the day he comes in, you'll grab him.
There'll be, the deal is you have to face the justice of Quebec.
The impression that was given for the longest time is that Quebec couldn't find Mark Levy. He disappeared right after the fire. But his lawyers in Coral Gables say that as early as 3 months after the fire, he was receiving letters directed by your department to Mark Levy.
Well, we never really lost track of Mark Levy. Mark Levy has had business representatives, mainly lawyers, in Montreal and in Florida. We have problem of bringing him back, but we haven't lost track of him.
Well, Mark Levy has told us throughout this interview that he's a scapegoat, that the Quebec government knew all along what he was doing. They never fined him, they never charged him, and basically you're going after him because your department screwed up.
Well, I'm not going to pretend that the department didn't, in a lot of ways, screwed up. The fire commissioner, who investigated after the fact, said that the Department of Environment of Quebec was administratively clumsy and very slow to react to the situation, and I think that the department should take the blame.
The people of St-Basile-le-Grand are angry at your government, at your department. How come 2 years later, nothing's been done to remove those PCBs?
Right after the fire, the Quebec government put on a commission on dangerous waste, the Charbonneau Commission. And one of the mandates of the Charbonneau Commission was to give recommendation to the government to what to do.
And what are you going to do?
Well, we are talking about mobile or transportable equipment to destruct the PCB.
So you now have to go to the place where the big fire scared 3,500 people to death. And now you have to say to them, we're going to set up a mobile incinerator and burn this in your backyard.
Well, if you look at what the federal government and the Defense Department have done in Goose Bay, it has proven to be a very safe method.
When that PCB warehouse went up in flames, the credibility of your department also went up in smoke.
Oh, we were, I had public opinion reports that showed that the credibility of the department was lesser than the one of the environmentalist group, of the scientific world, even of the private sector. We were really at the bottom of it all because the department was left with no credibility at all. We still feel the pressure because that is still very much a dark spot on the image of our government and our administration.
You think you can ever erase that dark spot?
No, you cannot erase dark spot of those or that dimension. You can only make it a little bit grayer.